In 1982, a curtain rod salesman beat the best firearms manufacturers in the world. His name was Gaston Glock. He had never designed a gun in his life, but 4 years later, when his pistol hit America, a lie nearly destroyed everything. A Washington Post columnist claimed it was invisible to metal detectors. Congress tried to ban it. Hollywood made it worse. But the Glock survived and changed every pistol ever made after it. But before that story comes the impossible one. The year was 1979, and Gaston Glock was exactly the kind of person you'd never expect to revolutionize anything. In his small factory outside Vienna, he manufactured curtain rods, door handles, and the occasional military knife for the Austrian army. The factory floor was clean, efficient, and utterly ordinary. Glock himself was 50 years old, methodical, and had never shown any particular interest in firearms. But that was about to change, in the most unexpected way possible. The Austrian Ministry of Defense had a problem. Their aging Walther P38 pistols were falling apart, and they needed a replacement. After watching NATO allies modernize their sidearms throughout the 1970s, Austria decided it was time to join the 20th century. In 1980, they issued a tender for a new service pistol with 17 specific requirements. The list was demanding. The new pistol had to fire 15,000 rounds without malfunction. It needed to function in temperatures from -40 to +70 degrees Celsius. It had to be accurate, reliable, and simple enough for conscripts to maintain. Most importantly, it had to beat the established players in the firearms world who were already circling like sharks. Beretta brought their 92 series, Heckler & Koch submitted their P7, SIG Sauer offered their P225. These weren't startups or unknowns. These were companies that had been building military firearms for generations, with engineering teams, testing facilities, and reputations built on decades of proven performance. Then there was Gaston Glock, who had exactly zero experience designing pistols. Most people would have looked at that competition and walked away, but Glock saw something the others missed. All these established manufacturers were carrying the weight of their own traditions. They had legacy designs, existing tooling, and decades of assumptions about how a pistol should work. Glock had none of that baggage. At his Vienna facility, Glock assembled a team of engineers and gave them a simple mandate. Forget everything you think you know about how a pistol should work. Start from scratch and build the best possible design for these 17 requirements. The team spent months analyzing existing pistols, not to copy them, but to understand why they failed. They studied reliability reports from military units. They examined maintenance records. They talked to soldiers about what actually went wrong in the field. What they discovered was that most pistol failures came from the same source: too many moving parts. Traditional pistols were marvels of mechanical complexity: double-action triggers, manual safeties, decockers, slide stops controlled by tiny springs and levers. Each additional component was another point of potential failure. In the mud of a battlefield or the chaos of urban combat, complex mechanisms failed. Glock's team took a different approach. Instead of adding mechanisms to make the gun safe, they would make safety integral to the design itself. Instead of complex trigger systems, they would create something so simple it could barely break. And instead of steel throughout, they would use polymer where it made sense. The decision to use polymer for the frame was revolutionary, but it wasn't driven by weight savings or cost reduction. It was driven by performance. Polymer didn't rust. It didn't require the same level of maintenance as steel. It could be molded to exact specifications every time, eliminating the small variations that plagued hand-fitted guns. In the workshop behind Glock's factory, the first prototypes began to take shape. The design was radically simple, 34 parts total compared to over 60 in most competing pistols. No external safety lever, no decocker, no hammer, just a striker system so straightforward that soldiers could disassemble and reassemble the gun in complete darkness. But simple didn't mean crude. Every component was designed with precision manufacturing in mind. The barrel was cold hammer forged to specifications tighter than most competition pistols. The slide was machined from solid steel billets. The polymer frame was reinforced with steel inserts exactly where stress analysis showed they were needed. 6 months after starting, Glock had his prototype. Now came the truly dangerous part: testing. Most firearms manufacturers have extensive testing facilities with reinforced chambers and remote firing systems. Glock had none of that. So he built a simple wooden box, loaded the prototype, and fired it himself. But he made one crucial decision that would become legendary in firearm circles. He fired every test round left-handed. The logic was brutally practical. If the gun exploded during testing, it would destroy his left hand. That would be devastating, but he could still draw blueprints and sign contracts with his right hand. If he lost his right hand, his career as an engineer was over. Round after round, the prototype performed flawlessly. When minor issues arose, Glock's team would modify the design and test again. Always left-handed, always pushing the limits. By the time they were ready to submit to the Austrian army, Glock had personally fired thousands of rounds through dozens of prototypes. The official testing began in early 1982. Military evaluators put each pistol through a gauntlet that would destroy most civilian firearms. 15,000 round endurance tests, extreme temperature cycling, drop tests from 6 feet onto concrete, underwater submersion, sand and mud contamination. Each test was designed to find the breaking point. One by one, the established manufacturers began to fail. The Beretta 92 suffered slide cracks after 12,000 rounds. The Heckler & Koch P7 had feeding issues in extreme cold. The SIG Sauer P225 showed accuracy degradation after sustained firing. The Glock kept working. When the dust settled, the evaluation results were almost embarrassing for the competition. The Glock had passed every single requirement, and in most categories it hadn't just passed, it had exceeded specifications by substantial margins. Accuracy was better than required. Reliability was off the charts. Simplicity of maintenance was in a different league entirely. On May 19, 1982, the Austrian army announced their decision. Contract winner, Glock GS.MBH. The curtain rod salesman had beaten the best firearms manufacturers in the world on his first attempt, but winning the Austrian contract was just the beginning. Glock knew that his real opportunity lay across the Atlantic, where American police departments were facing their own crisis with outdated revolvers. The question was whether a gun that had succeeded in Austrian military testing could survive the much more complicated world of American law enforcement and civilian markets. In 1986, Glock opened his American operation in Smyrna, Georgia. The timing couldn't have been better. Police departments across the United States were recognizing that their 6-shot revolvers were dangerously outgunned by criminals carrying high-capacity pistols. The FBI's disastrous 1986 shootout in Miami had made national headlines, highlighting the limitations of traditional police firearms. Glock's timing was perfect, but his marketing approach was unconventional. Instead of flashy advertising campaigns or celebrity endorsements, he focused on the people who actually used firearms professionally. He invited police trainers to extensive testing programs. He provided guns for evaluation at no cost. Most importantly, he listened to feedback and incorporated suggestions into the design. The response from law enforcement professionals was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Officers who tested the Glock reported that it was faster to deploy than revolvers, more reliable than traditional automatics, and required less training to maintain proficiency. The simple striker fired action meant fewer things could go wrong under stress. The high-capacity magazine provided a decisive tactical advantage. Within months, police departments began switching. First, a few progressive departments in Georgia and Florida, then larger agencies in Texas and California. Each successful adoption created a reference for the next department, considering the switch. Word of mouth in law enforcement circles was spreading faster than any advertising campaign could have achieved. But just as Glock's American success was building momentum, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. On January 13, 1986, Washington Post columnist Jack Anderson published a story that would nearly destroy Glock's reputation before it was fully established in America. The headline read, "Gaddafi Buying Austrian Plastic Pistol." Anderson claimed that Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi was secretly purchasing Glock pistols because they could slip through airport metal detectors undetected. The story was completely false. Glock pistols contained over a pound of steel in the barrel, slide, and internal components. They were easily detectable by any metal detection system. The polymer frame contained enough metal inserts that X-ray machines could identify them without difficulty, but Anderson's story created a media firestorm that facts couldn't contain. Within days, other journalists were repeating the claim without verification. Television news programs ran segments about plastic guns that terrorists could smuggle onto airplanes. Editorial writers demanded immediate action. The story took on a life of its own, fueled by Cold War anxieties and genuine concerns about aviation security. Congressional hearings were scheduled for February. Senator Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio introduced legislation to ban any firearm that couldn't be detected by existing security systems. The proposed law was so broadly written that it would have banned the Glock entirely, despite the fact that it was easily detectable by metal detectors. Glock found himself in an impossible position. His company was being attacked for a capability his guns didn't possess by politicians who had never examined the actual product. The hearings in Washington became a theater of misinformation, where senators held up Glock pistols and claimed they were invisible to security systems. The irony was devastating. While Congress was debating whether to ban the Glock for being undetectable, every airport metal detector in America was successfully identifying them every time law enforcement officers carried them through security checkpoints. But political momentum rarely relies on technical accuracy. Hollywood made the situation worse. The 1990 movie Die Hard 2 featured a fictional Glock 7 made of porcelain that could pass through metal detectors. The movie gun was completely imaginary. No such weapon existed or could exist, but it reinforced public misconceptions about Glock's actual products. Newspapers began referring to the Glock as the Hijacker's Special. Editorial cartoons showed terrorists walking through metal detectors with invisible guns. Congressional offices received thousands of letters from constituents demanding action against phantom weapons. For Glock, the crisis threatened to destroy years of careful relationship building with American law enforcement. Police departments that had been considering the switch were now hesitant to adopt a weapon that generated negative headlines. Gun stores reported customers asking for anything but the Glock because they didn't want to be associated with the controversy. The company's response was methodical and fact-based. Glock representatives appeared at congressional hearings with actual pistols and metal detectors, demonstrating that the guns were easily detectable. They provided technical specifications showing the exact steel content. They invited congressional staff to visit their facility in Austria to examine the manufacturing process. Most importantly, they continued working with law enforcement professionals who understood the actual capabilities of the firearm. Police trainers who had tested the Glock knew the truth about its detectability. Their reports to department leadership helped counter the media narrative with professional assessments based on actual testing. The Undetectable Firearms Act was eventually passed in 1988, but the final version was more reasonable than the original proposal. It banned firearms that couldn't be detected by security systems, but it included exemptions for existing designs that could be detected. The law essentially codified what was already true, that Glock pistols were easily identifiable by metal detectors and X-ray machines. More importantly for Glock, the controversy had an unexpected positive effect. The extensive media coverage had made the Glock name famous throughout America. Police officers who had never heard of the company now knew it existed. Gun enthusiasts who had dismissed it as a foreign novelty were curious to see what all the fuss was about. While politicians were debating and journalists were speculating, a quiet revolution was taking place in American law enforcement. Department after department was conducting their own testing and reaching the same conclusion. The Glock worked better than anything else they had tried. The New York Police Department began an evaluation in 1989, concluding the Glock 19 offered the best reliability, capacity, and ease of training. When the traditionally cautious NYPD authorized the Glock, it signaled to American law enforcement that this wasn't a gimmick. By 1990, the momentum was irreversible. Departments in Los Angeles, Chicago, Detroit, and Miami switched to Glock, creating case studies that made the next department's decision easier. The civilian market quickly followed law enforcement's lead. Skeptical gun stores stocked them, and magazines that initially dismissed the plastic toy began publishing favorable reviews. But the most telling response came from competitors who had once mocked the polymer frame. Smith Wesson announced their Sigma series in 1994, borrowing so heavily from Glock's design that Glock sued for patent infringement and won substantial damages. Walther, Heckler & Koch, and Springfield Armory soon launched their own versions. These manufacturers recognized that Glock's approach was fundamentally superior. Polymer frames were lighter and more durable than steel, while striker-fired actions were simpler and more reliable than traditional hammer systems. By 2000, the transformation was complete. The American market had shifted from steel-framed, hammer-fired pistols to polymer-framed, striker-fired designs. The change extended globally, with forces like the British Special Air Service, German GSG-9, and French National Police adopting Glock pistols. The gun that started as an Austrian military contract had become the global standard for professional firearms. Training philosophies evolved to accommodate the new technology. Glock's design eliminated manual safety manipulation and hammer management, allowing instructors to focus on marksmanship and tactical application. New officers could achieve proficiency faster, and experienced officers maintained skills with less practice. The reliability advantages became legendary in professional circles. Military and police units reported Glock pistols functioning normally after being buried in sand, submerged in swamps, and subjected to years of daily carry without cleaning. These real-world experiences carried more weight than any advertising campaign. The ultimate compliment came when restricted markets like Russia and China began producing obvious copies of Glock designs. The financial success was equally dramatic. Glock went from a small manufacturer of door handles to a global company with hundreds of millions in revenue, making Gaston Glock a billionaire. But success brought new challenges. As competitors like Smith Wesson and SIG Sauer raised the performance bar, Glock responded by continuing to innovate within their proven framework, introducing interchangeable backstraps and improved triggers. The basic architecture remained the same, but details continued to evolve based on user feedback. Today, more than 40 years after that first Austrian army contract, the landscape of pistol design has been permanently transformed. Visit any police department, military unit, or civilian gun store in America, and polymer-framed striker-fired pistols dominate. The designs vary in details, but they all share the same fundamental architecture that Glock pioneered in 1982. The numbers tell the story. Glock has sold over 15 million pistols worldwide, holding over 60% of the U.S. law enforcement market, but their real victory is that every major competitor has adopted their basic design philosophy. The Smith & Wesson M and P series, the SIG Sauer P320, and even Beretta's APX series are fundamentally refined versions of concepts Glock introduced decades earlier.